So, big budget. Rachel Reeves got leaked by the OBR, the Office for Budget Responsibility. I think a good opportunity to just get rid of the OBR because leaking budgets is the least of the problems. They're killing the country. But what does the budget all mean? Is it going to turn everything around? Rachel Reeves is the most unpopular Chancellor of the Exchequer since records began, in the most unpopular government since polling records began. So, is this going to turn it all around for her and, more importantly, the country? Well, we've got James Meadway, who is the superb economist who I always have on at this time. This is like, I guess, economics Christmas. And he's also co-host, for example, of Macrodose. Do you check out that podcast? Are you still co-host of Macrodose?
I am, yes.
Yes. Well, there we go. Nothing's changed. Please change. Right. Okay, let's go straight in, James.
Okay.
Bam.
Right.
Okay, overall take. Now, this is interesting because George Eaton, who works for the New Statesman, and I think it's fair to say often shares briefings he's clearly getting from the government. He said, as I reported, number 10/number 11 are happy for this to be seen as a left turn. Starmerism is entirely based on defining itself against the left. That is literally all they had for years. That is the complete opposite of the whole point of Starmerism. What does that tell us? Just that alone, what does that tell us?
It tells us that finally they're under some pressure from the left. I mean, they're feeling the pinch. They will know they have backbench MPs who are already up in arms over this year, rightly so, actually, over assorted welfare cuts. And that's one of the things that Rachel Reeves was attempting to find money for in this budget. But more than that, it's every single Labour MP knows very, very well that they have the Greens in particular breathing down their neck from the left, but some actually have reform on the right. That's kind of exercising in one way. You can see this kind of balancing act that probably makes sense in like number 10's head, if it makes no sense to anyone else, which is like you got 1 week Shabana Mahmood saying variants of send them all back, and then this week you got Rachel Reeves saying aren't we good lefties introducing a mansion tax. It's confused, but you can see the pressure they're under.
Now let's just start with some good stuff to show that I'm not just here to I suppose go for the Starmerite nonsense. 2-child benefit cap. Now that drives hundreds of thousands of children into poverty. It's the biggest single generated child poverty in the country. And, for ages, they refused to do anything about it. They suspended Labour MPs who voted to get rid of it, but they've got rid of it. That is a big win.
Yes.
We care on the left. We care about things like children being in poverty. That's what kind of drives us. What do you think about that? Just talk about that.
What it tells, look, first of all, it is a win, and it's an important one because this was driving hundreds of thousands of children into poverty. It was like the primary driver of child poverty, which has been rising. I mean, to its credit, Labour in government last time saw a big decline in child poverty. This is a thing that it did. It is a historic achievement to do that. What we've seen under austerity and now continuing under this Labour government is, at least in the forecast, child poverty was rising again. So get rid of that. That will definitely help hundreds of thousands of children. This is a very good thing. And it's a political win too, because, of course, exactly as you said, there's a bunch of Labour MPs lost the whip over this. There's been people campaigning outside of Parliament about this. The government has listened, is generous, been forced to, might be more accurate, turn around and say, okay, it's gone. So that's very, very good that this is done. Let's take that and actually start to think about, okay, what are the other welfare changes that we can start to think of that would improve people's lives? How can we have a more generous welfare system in general? Because it's not good enough to just sit there and say, okay, some of the very worst, the most egregious cuts, the very worst things that we saw under the coalition and Conservative governments is now being scrapped. Fine, but we can do better than this.
Now, I mean, in terms of them presenting this as an actual left turn, they've come under pressure. Is it? Is this socialism in our time? Is what I was trying to ask you, James.
I mean, look, when you put it like that, the answer is sort of sitting there in front of us. And no, of course it's not. I mean, the really telling chart in the Office of Budget Responsibility forecast, the document, an extraordinary thing, it was just leaked about an hour before Rachel Reeves stood up. I mean, it's unprecedented. This is an entire budget document, pretty much the entire budget and all its details and all its analysis leaked an hour before she actually stood up to present the thing. So much for secrecy. I mean, once upon a time, chancellors had to resign if they so much as whispered a sentence of the budget. Hugh Dalton, Labour's chancellor after the Second World War, had to go because he kind of accidentally said a sentence of the budget to a journalist just ahead of it. No more of this. The whole thing's leaked and everyone's seen it. What the OBR have is a chart on page 96. If you're a real nerd, you can go and find it, which shows the difference between the amount that people pay in tax on their labour income, like what you pay on when you work, your salary and wages, that's about 40%, and what you pay on profits, which is about 15%. And that's been really consistent. You can see it on the graph for years, for like a decade. Has this government done anything about that? No. Has there been a significant increase in a taxation of wealth rather than work? Well, there's been some. Right, they have increased the taxes on investment income. They have introduced this big, it's been called the mansion tax. It's basically an increase in council taxes, but it goes to the government if you have a house worth more than £2 million. These are not bad things in themselves. They just aren't, right? This is, you can say, okay, this is something. This is a nod in the right direction. But does it get you anything like the distance you need to get? Does it close that gap between 15% or so in corporate profit taxes and 40% on income from work? No, it does not. Does it address the extraordinary amount of wealth inequality we see in this country over the last, well, it's now 40 odd years really, but it's been worse under the last 10, 15 or so. You can see the impacts of austerity there. Does it do that? Not really. And does it start to turn around public services? Well, it may patch up some of the holes. Two-child benefit cap gone, good. There's some more money from last year. There's bits and pieces here and there. Okay, fine. Does it actually start to make the country feel like it's working again? I doubt it very much.
Well, I mean, on that, I mean, obviously we had austerity after the financial crash caused by the bankers. Obviously, ordinary people picked up the tab there. And in terms of what that meant to public services, infrastructure, the country, where does this go in terms of reversing that? To get basically just going back to where we were a long time ago now.
Yeah. I mean, this is really from last year's budget where they had this sort of substantial increase in public spending, at least over the first bit of this parliament, and it doesn't really move the dial from that. So it's kind of like in some places it is back to where we might have been before austerity started, which is like going back 15 years now. You know, you just kind of got back to where you started at best in some places, in some parts of public spending. Things like local authorities are still being squeezed. I noticed that there's a forecast increase in local authority borrowing over this year. Now that ought to set off some alarm bells when you think how stretched local authorities already are. Doesn't seem to be much in the way of new cash going there. The distance between what's needed in the NHS, you look into the future and what's coming through, remains absolutely enormous. And I think to cap it all, and this sort of tells you how compromised this government is in the end. The story in the Financial Times yesterday leaks from people they've been talking to in financial services who said that the Treasury told them almost in so many words that they need to go and talk up how great this budget is because the Treasury didn't go after those record profits that banks have been making this year because interest rates have gone up. Oh, and by the way, because we're paying about £20 billion a year via the Bank of England to these banks, that's money that we have and then we give to the banks for various, as far as the Bank of England is concerned, complicated monetary policy reasons. In reality, it's just a handover. This government didn't go after them. Not only did it not go after them, it wants them to go out and say what a great budget it was and how everything's good, really, because it didn't go after them. Now, that tells you something important about how power operates in this country, but it also tells you something important about how compromised this government is.
I mean, in terms of what the government said, I mean, other than bashing the left, I mean, their mission was supposed to be growth,
Good.
and putting money in people's pockets. And what the growth forecasts, as we know, leaked them before she even spoke. They've obviously been, they're obviously down, but also real disposable income.
Yep.
That now is, we've gone through the longest squeeze in wages, for example, since the Napoleonic age. Disposable income has been, I mean, the chart is astonishing, actually. It goes down to a very, very, very sluggish pace per year now.
Yeah. I mean, this is, look, Rachel Reeves and the Treasury are trying to bill it as a cost of living budget. There are some welcome measures there, and we'll have to welcome them. Freeze and rail fares is a nice thing to have. First time in absolutely decades that this has happened, right? That's going to be welcomed by anybody who has to use a train. Still means trains are really expensive, by the way. Like the freeze is not like cutting and doesn't do very much for often less well-off people who have to rely on buses across much of the country, for example. But it is there. It is a real thing. Same thing with the increase in the national minimum wage. They are starting to come under some pressure about this because it has increased a fair bit over the last few years. So various employer organisations are starting to jump up and down about it. It's still increased. It still matters. It's still there. These things are real. These things make a difference. But in the overall picture is, I'm sorry, one where, in this case, the OBR, these forecasts are often wrong, frankly. Over the last 15 odd years, it's been around consistently pretty wrong, but they tend to be wrong to the upside. The OBR are a happy, sunny bunch who believe that everything is going to get better at some point in the future. That point, you'll notice, has never really arrived. I mean, that's what's happened for as long as it's been there. They think growth is going to be lower next year and outwards into the future. And that matters if you have a government that says, hey, growth is a big thing we want, but you're not getting it. And the second thing is, unless you have some real action to put more money in people's pockets, you have redistribution, growth is the only thing that means most people's real incomes will rise. And if there's not much of it, you're probably not going to get much money either, right? So it doesn't look good from that point of view. Again, it's a compromised government. It's not doing enough. It's turning around because it's under political pressure, but it's not got a clear direction how you're going to really transform how the economy operates for most people.
And that's the final thing I want to ask you about, because the critique will come back that if someone like, yourself was in charge, we'd get a left-wing Liz Truss scenario. The markets would panic. Everything would go haywire. And actually they'd say, well, actually the real issue here is that the left just want to double down on the very things that the government is doing. So, for example, increasing taxes, that's throttling growth and real disposable incomes. That's the sort of critique which is coming out. They're saying basically the critique of this is from the Tories, obviously, is the too left wing. So what would the left actually do in power that's different, which would mean real disposable incomes increasing, growth, and better distributed, and the market's not going haywire?
Well, we've got to go a lot further and do more on not just saying, okay, what are the little nibbly bits we can do because we're under pressure, but what is it that's going to define a direction for what the country's doing and where we head. That, by the way, is how you're going to keep the markets in line. I mean, what you don't want is to end up being managed by the markets, and that's what started to happen to this government very clearly over this year. It's attempted to try and set up a framework where it manages the markets. What's actually happened is its own framework means the markets are managing the government, and it's trapped by this, and all of its decision-making is being consumed by this. You saw the kind of chaos, really. The flux, at least in the run-up to this budget, was defined by markets moving up and down and leaks and all the rest of it. So it's being managed by the markets. If you want to manage markets, what you need to do is give a clear sense of direction to the thing that markets really care about, like what is going to happen to the deficit in particular, not over the next 3 years like this government talks about, but over the next 5 and 10 years. That's what you want to say. You want a clear narrative about what it is this government is doing. So you say well in advance where you're going to be next year. What we've actually seen in this one is like one big whack last year's budget, and then they have to come back this year and do another sort of big whack around the headroom and lots of other things. And then who knows where we're going to end up next year. I suspect we might be in a rather similar place, by the way. So there's not a clear sense of direction to it. But if you don't have that, what you start seeing in the bond markets is this sort of agitation about what it is that the government's doing, because it's not clear to people trading who are very political. They just want to make money, right? And they'll look for the safest, quickest return they can get. And if it looks like you're a kind of risky, weird, don't know what you're doing return, they're not going to give you money. If you want to talk about concretely what that means, I think, frankly, this does mean looking closely at the fact we're handing £20 billion or thereabouts every single year over to the Bank of England so it can pay it to the commercial banks, because that's what's happening. We don't need to pay that money. You can hack away at a great old chunk of it, doing something called tiered reserves, for example, which a lot of economists are now starting to talk about. You can claw that money back quite easily over there. And the other one, the biggie, the thing that they are refusing to do but is sitting there waiting to be done, is a wealth tax. And by the way, if people want to dig out a report from Reuters, the financial and business journalists, a business news site from yesterday, looking at what has actually happened in Norway, where they've increased the wealth tax over the last year or so. It's always held up, oh, the millionaires leaving, everyone's leaving, it's disaster. Complete nonsense. It's bringing in money. Interestingly, Reuters say it's bringing in so much money that it's about the same amount that Rachel Reeves has been scrabbling around for in equivalent terms in Norway, as we're looking at here, because it's a successful tax. And although there's a few people who have left, in practice, most people are paying it, because that's what happens when you raise a tax like this. So a wealth tax, of course, that's 10, 20 billion pounds, depending on where you set the thing and the level you put it at. And of course, you go for those people right at the very, very top. You don't start going after everybody else further down the income distribution.
So quick summary then is some welcome changes because of pressure from the left that doesn't touch the sides in terms of the state that the country is in. And there is obviously an alternative, and we can see examples of that, for example, in Norway being enacted. Fine, easy. James, it's always a pleasure. For those watching, press like and subscribe with your comments, thoughts, and share the video. For James, always a pleasure. Thank you.
Right. Cheers, Owen. See you then.